Hi, my name is Janet Hall Werner. I'm an attorney with a law degree from the University of Virginia, and I worked as a federal lobbyist for 25 years, 15 of them running my own consulting firm. But now I'm pursuing my true calling, which is helping people to discover their family history. Today I'm going to talk about Pierce Flahavan, who is the great-great-grandfather of John Flahavan Jr. and his sisters. Pierce was born in about 1826 in a tiny remote townland called Carrickaverahain in County Waterford, Ireland. Carrickaverahain is about 3 miles northeast of the centre of Tramore, which is on the coast in County Waterford. These are some pictures that I just pulled off of Google. There's an old picture postcard from the beach. That's Lismore Castle. That's the city of Waterford. That's Tramore. And that's the little harbor at Tramore. Unfortunately, there is no record of Pierce's birth. The records for that parish are only available beginning in 1829, and he was born around 1826. But this is the baptismal record of his brother Jacob, born in 1829, written in Latin as the priests did back then. And this is Pierce's sister Ellen, or Eleanor's baptismal record, born in February 1832. We know from these records, which are confirmed also by later records, that Pierce's father's name was Philip and his mother's maiden name was Catherine Power. And Power is a very common name in that part of Ireland. I'll also note that the name Flahavan was in all the early records from about 1853 back spelled Flavahan, and then it morphed into Flahavan in the 1850s, and then into Flavan, both in America and in Ireland, around a little before 1900. But it's not surprising that there was inconsistency in spelling and even in pronunciation, since records were written in English while the people's language was Gaelic. Now I want you to imagine for a few minutes that you're Pierce, and you're living in Carrickaverahain. You're Catholic, of course, and you walk every week, perhaps more often, to your local church. Unfortunately, your church is not still standing, but it probably looked a lot like this church, which was built during that time period. The year is 1836, and you're about 10 years old. Perhaps your family looks like this. Or like this, or like this. Your father Philip is a small farmer, farming about 23 acres. You have at least 3 siblings, probably several more. We know of Ellen and Jacob, and another brother named Maurice. A series of reports written in the mid to late 1830s describes in detail some of the counties in Ireland. Unfortunately, County Waterford was not covered, but the reports are instructive as to how the peasant class lived back then. A typical passage in one of the reports states as follows. Under a section called Habits of the People, the report states, quote, "Their habits are bad, being very much addicted to whiskey and party fights. Their houses are of limestone, but very little of it is expended in whitewashing the cabins, either inside or out. The cow, horse, or ass lives in the same room with the family, and dirt and filth are the common characteristics of their dwellings. In this state of things, some drag out existence for 100 or more years. They do not marry very early," unquote. Now remember, this was written by an Englishman, and it's clear that the English held nothing but contempt for their Irish subjects. But it's probably accurate in terms of the content. You have to remember what the Irish were up against, though. Catholics were not permitted by law to own land in Ireland until the late 1700s, and Ireland was essentially still operating under a feudal system of land ownership, where Anglo-Irish landlords owned the land and leased it out, often to a mid-tier person who subleased it, down to the Irish peasant who had to pay a high rent for the privilege of farming the land. Then the peasants were taxed by the British Crown, taxed by the Anglican Church, the Church of England, which they did not attend, and if they were Catholic, which the vast majority of the peasant class was, they were also taxed by the Catholic Church. It's no wonder that they drank. They would have paid their taxes in the potatoes they grew, the eggs laid by their chickens, the pork produced by their pigs. So it's 1836 and you're about 10 years old or so. Some tiny schools exist in Ireland at this time, but they are not well attended, and there are none within walking distance of where you live, so you do not go. But you do speak both Irish or Gaelic and English. You don't know how to read or write, and you will never learn. Now fast forward about 9 years. The year is 1845, and you're now 19 years old. You're getting to the age where you would normally be thinking about getting married. And then that summer, 1845, a mysterious blight appears on your family's potato crop. And it turns out that the blight has appeared on the potato crop all across Ireland. The effect of the blight was devastating, and about 1/3 of the potato crop was lost that summer. The British government responded to the crisis initially by buying Indian corn from America and providing it to the peasants. They also opened some soup kitchens and began some public works projects. The next summer, 1846, the blight returned and the potato crop failed completely. And importantly, a new Whig government was elected in Britain. The Whigs held strongly laissez-faire principles of government and wanted the Irish to stand on their own. Viewing the crisis as the responsibility of the landlords and the poor law system, they actually reduced grain imports into Ireland and closed down the soup kitchens and the public works programs. Furthermore, they had for a very long time wanted to shake out the backward agricultural system that operated in Ireland. The crisis was viewed as the natural result of that broken system and also an opportunity to fix it. One can't ignore as well the religious overtones that were evident in the British response to the crisis. The Whigs were generally devout Protestant evangelicals who saw their material success as the direct result of their Protestantism, while they viewed the Irish as lazy, drunk, and slothful, which they equated with Irish Catholicism. The next summer, 1847, the blight did not return, but the peasants had planted so few potatoes because they had eaten their seed potatoes instead of planting them after the crop failure the previous year. 1847 was called Black 47. People were now dying of starvation and the diseases caused by starvation, namely typhus and relapsing fever. And hordes of starving peasants roamed the countryside, looking for food or for anything that could possibly help them. The poor law system, which was supposed to provide a safety net in case of an economic or agricultural crisis, was completely overwhelmed. And now the landlords themselves were becoming stretched, since many people were now unable to pay their rents. So the landlords became tougher on the tenants, and evictions increased, throwing more destitute and starving families into the streets and onto the countryside. When the potato crop failed again in 1848, the result was, again, catastrophic. The only choice for many to escape starvation was emigration. They crammed onto ships heading for New York City, Boston, Canada, Australia, anywhere but here. Many of them were so depleted that they died on the journey or upon their arrival. It is estimated that about 200,000 people emigrated from Ireland in 1847 alone, with 20% perishing on the trip or on arrival. That's 40,000 people in 1 year alone. And they were truly wretched. Other immigrants arriving to America at the time were poor, but nothing like the Irish, who were starving, sick, and destitute. Emigration became a way of life for Ireland in the years and decades after that. While the potato crop recovered after 1852, millions had either died or emigrated by then. The numbers tell the story. This number here, 2 million, is certainly an overstatement. Modern estimates are that about 750,000 people died in the famine, and another 750,000 people emigrated. The 1841 census before the famine showed a population of almost 8.2 million. In 1851, that population had been reduced to 6.5 million, a reduction of 20%. Imagine if our country lost 60 million people over the course of 7 years. That was the comparable loss for Ireland, and the emigration would continue in waves over the following decades, resulting in a population decline to less than 4.4 million people in 1911. The population has recovered somewhat since then, but it is still, to this day, not at its pre-famine level. This is a picture of the Famine Memorial in Dublin. Very striking. The famine left a large imprint in the psyche of Ireland, and it engendered an almost unspeakable contempt among the Irish, both those who left and those who stayed, for the British, who occupied the richest country in the world and who were willing to let an entire people starve to death. The seeds of rebellion, which had long been an undercurrent in Ireland, took root in earnest in the wake of the famine. Nationalists became radicalized and began a movement that would finally become realized in the birth of an independent Irish state, the Republic of Ireland, in 1922. Now, I believe that there are certain historical events that reverberate through the life of a country and through the lives and the families of all those who lived through them. Think about our own American history. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, culminating in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the Great Depression, Pearl Harbor, which certainly reverberated through the Flahavan family, the assassination of President Kennedy, 9/11. For Ireland, the famine was like that. It was one of the great hinge points of Irish history, and it reverberated through the country as a whole and through all the families who lived through it. A large majority of families living in Ireland at the time would have lost at least one family member. I believe it is highly likely that Pierce's family lost at least one family member, and probably more than one. So it is against this backdrop that we look at the rest of Pierce's life and the lives of his children. That is the end of part 1. Please join me for part 2.